Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another CirdecSongs interview. As always, I ask you to like, subscribe, share, comment, do all that stuff that'll make me popular because the algorithm wants me to be popular and other people want me to be popular and I want me to be popular. Anyway, my guest today is a young musician I caught at Progstock in Rutherford, New Jersey just a few days ago. He has a wonderful band called Aziola Cry that absolutely blew my mind. He is a Warr guitar player, which always blows my mind because he has a remarkable patience to play it. He is Jason Blake. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on.
Excellent. I appreciate you being here. Like I said, your band was amazing.
Cool.
They really got to me. So I'm looking forward to hearing even more for you. But first, I have to know, where did the band name come from?
So I'm back in high school. I didn't pay too much attention in a lot of classes, but one class that really stood out to me was my literacy class. And that class, we did poetry, and we did specifically 1 year poetry of the Romantic era. And I don't know why it just somehow connected to me and so many different levels, but the poetry of Shelley, Percy Shelley, stood out.
Ah,
And so I really enjoyed analyzing it, talking about it, doing all the things we did in class. Well, many years later, I kind of revisited that, knowing that I had this appreciation of it even as far back as high school. So when I went looking back on it, I realized, boy, I still like this stuff. This is very enjoyable. Well, he has a poem where he talks about hearing the sound of an Aziola cry. And if you go through the poem, it kind of talks about, is it the west wind? Is it a downy owl? Is it the cry of a woman? He goes all through all these different things and he can't figure out what it is. But at the end, he says, whatever it is, it's the most beautiful, sad sound he's ever heard. And so that always just stuck with me as like, this would be a great band name because of the idea of it being a beautiful, sad sound. So that's where it comes
that's
from
good.
a old
And,
poem.
and now I have more poetry to learn. So it's always glad that someone enhances my desire to educate myself even more. I'm going to keep picking on your beginnings. I don't think anybody just runs out and decides they're going to be a Warr guitar player. You might surprise me with that. Tell us about your background and what led you to that instrument because it's not easy to play.
No, so I think that what I did in hindsight, this was not a plan, but in hindsight, it all makes sense. I started on piano when I was young. So I took many years of piano lessons. And I think that, like, again, looking back in hindsight, that makes all the sense in the world because it is
Yeah.
a two-hand touch tapping instrument and actually employs really close uh, skills to what you're doing on a piano. So I did that for many years. Then I switched to guitar in high school. I wanted to be more of a rock guitarist at that point. So I switched from piano to guitar and then formed a band where we needed a bass player, not a guitarist. So I switched to bass. That switch was actually very fundamental in my development because I turned to be just loving being a bass player at that point and then really just delved in. Bought myself an upright bass and started taking jazz lessons and classical lessons with two different instructors. Bought electric basses and was playing pretty extensively in bands at the time. So one thing led to another, and I think this is probably maybe where the commonality of touch style guitars comes in, is I started doing a lot of tapping on my instrument, which was a bass at the time.
Uh,
So I loved what like Stu Hamm and Billy Sheehan were doing, where they were tapping on a bass. And so I was just playing one day, and I used to do these little solo shows playing the bass guitar. And somebody came up to me and said, there's an instrument that's designed specifically for that. It's called a Chapman Stick. So I thought it was kind of an interesting idea. I looked into it, found that, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, but I'd heard it before. I just didn't know that I had heard it on Peter Gabriel's songs or King Crimson songs.
right.
So I looked further into it, realized, oh, this is really cool. Saved up my money and bought an 8-string. It was it was called the stick bass. And so I really wanted to just kind of dabble in it, I guess, when I first got it. So I didn't want something that was so far out of the realm of what I was actually doing. So I wanted it to be a bass. I wanted all it had at that point was really an extended range of what I was doing on a bass, but fell in love with it so much that I went and got a grand stick at that point. That's the 12-string version of that.
Right.
Played that for many years. And then I'm trying to remember, somebody locally had a Warr guitar and let me just play it. I contacted Warr Guitars, and they said there's somebody in town if you want to actually get your hands on one. And so this guy was nice enough, let me borrow it for a week. And that's when I basically fell in love with the Warr Guitar and saw the potential that I wasn't able to really do with the stick that I wanted to do. And the Warr Guitar offered that. Since then, my original Warr Guitar, I still have that one, but that was, that's a pretty old one. I kind of keep it more, don't play it much, because the newer ones that I've been playing, those have a lot more of my input into them. And I just find that now the playability and the changes that have been made to the one that I played with Aziola Cry, that one actually, we've hollowed it out considerably just to take away a lot of the weight, because that one of the things that I kept finding is just that, carrying that thing, lugging it around over your neck was kind of dragging me down. And I don't know if you can't really see it in this camera, but like one of my shoulders actually tilts, I think, as a result of it. So we took out some of the weight. And so now, I exclusively have been playing those for quite some time and love those instruments. So it's a bit of a road, I would say, I guess is how I got there.
I like it. I like it because it takes everybody a minute to find what they're looking for, and the piano approach makes perfect sense because with my little ADHD addled mind, I don't know that I have the patience for that. I mean, I was proud of myself to mess around with a fretless bass, let alone let alone anything else in that realm. I look at the Warr guitar on the stick, and I'm just thinking to myself, nope, that's just not going to happen. It's going to look real pretty in the corner of my room, but it's gonna stay right there.
Decoration.
Exactly. The Warr
I
guitar
think
community.
one of the things with it, though, is, and I mean, everybody's different. Maybe some people just still kind of treat it as, an addition to what they're really doing. But one of the things that I really decided early on was that I loved it. So I wanted to I really put every other instrument down in order to concentrate on it exclusively. And that's not to say that that's the only way to do it, but I think it's the only way to really start to become good at it,
Yeah, that
because
makes
it
sense.
really isn't the type of instrument you dabble with. So I found that by completely devoting my time and energy to it, that's how I've improved on it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, unless your name is Tony Levin, I mean, you can't. So
Yeah.
I would imagine. I'm thinking Tony played the bass for a long time before he even got to the stick, so he already had
Yeah.
that vocabulary under him. Otherwise you just have to be really patient. How does that instrument come into a band dynamic? Because you can cover quite a bit of range when you're playing.
Yeah.
So how do you choose your bandmates?
That's an interesting question, because it kind of changes from time to time, and some days I feel like what I looking for is different. But what I started as, still coming from that bass side, I started as feeling like I was the bass player with a Warr guitar.
Okay.
So I think that was kind of my initial thought, and that really was probably the beginnings of Aziola Cry, for example. So I looked for a guitarist because I wanted somebody else to take the heavier side of the band, and I would play the bass. But yet I wanted to feature the instrument a little bit more than just simply being the bass player. So that's where I would take solos throughout the album, or I would have the guitar play a little bit more of a rhythm to my melody at times. So that was the kind of my initial thinking with the band, is, still coming from that bass player mentality, is that I would be the bass player. Since then, I've kind of branched into thinking a little bit differently, and start to think of myself more as a guitar player rather than a bass player. So a recent album that I did, entitled Subsequent Ruins, with Marco Miniman on drums, it was just him and I, and the plan there was like, I am the guitarist now. Sure, I'm also the bass player, but I wanted to feature the instrument and what the instrument itself could do. So I became a little bit more than the role that I am in Aziola Cry. So I I like the fact that I feel like it's versatile enough that you could do any configuration, but certain bands I like to play more the bass side of things, and in other bands I like to feature a little bit more of the melody and still play the bass, but do more of that two-hand tapping where both hands are completely independent versus playing a bass line with two hands or however. So
I'm rarely asked this question. I think it's because all the guitar magazines do, and I'm not as curious. But with a Warr guitar, I have to wonder what kind of effects and amplifiers are you using to maximize your sound?
That's a thing that's gone through many, many different changes. So I used to be, and still am to a certain degree, a big analog guy. So I was, for many years, doing the pedal dance on stage with a ton of different pedals. I ran to both signals, the bass side and the guitar side, through a whole different chain of pedals. I did get it to a point where I was pretty happy with it, and kind of had pedals triggering other pedals and all that kind of stuff. But then really it became again a little bit of the weight thing. I was lugging around. I was playing Aguilar bass amps for the bass side, and I had an 8x10 cabinet, and this thing was just monstrous. I
That's
love it. It
massive.
sounds great, but that between that and the bass head, it was just so much. And so I, about 3-4 years ago, switched to using fractal gear. So I use the AXFX3,
Uh-huh.
which back in the day, like I was using Line 6 pods at one point, and I had the guitar pod and then the bass pod, and I'd run both signals through, independently through those. With the AXFX3, what's brilliant about it is you can plug both sides into it, and you have one chain that you could create an entire, from amp modeling to pedals to whatever to the end. And then I can create a second chain for the bass side. And then I could either mix them at the end if I want to go mono, or send two signals out, which is what you would have heard there at Progstock. So
Yeah.
that was two different signals all coming out of one effects unit, which is the Fractal AXFX3. I love the thing. And what's brilliant about it is, outside of carrying a 3-space rack case, you bring your instrument, that, and then the pedal controller, and that's it.
Oh,
So
nice.
I've eliminated all of the amps and all that kind of stuff that I used to use. So for recording, I still go back to the pedals, and I still go back to the amps and miking, that kind of stuff. But for live, I absolutely love the fractal stuff. I also have an FM3 for my smaller gigs, which is just a smaller version of that XFX3, and it's absolutely brilliant for what it is that I do with that instrument.
Well, it's working well. I can say that for sure. As you were telling me all that, I'm like, wow, you should do something with Stefan Thalen, and,
Yeah,
because that would be fascinating between his mathematical approach and your two-handed approach. And let's call Marco and make it a trio, because
yeah,
that would
I
be
love that idea.
that would be.
Fantastic.
I'm hiring myself as your producer now, because that's I want to put that kind of project together. That would be a lot of fun. Aziola Cry is heavy. You talk about a beautiful sadness, and that almost fits the sound of the band. Was that an intentional approach, or did it just kind of happen organically?
Yeah. So if you go back again and kind of tracing some roots and thinking back, I was always into metal as a kid, and I just always have been into the heavier side of things. So when I was younger, bands like Slayer were, big influence on me. So I loved bands like that, not only because they were heavy, but also I loved the darkness, not necessarily always in the lyrical content. And I know a lot of heavy metal has darker lyrical content, but I was always more fascinated with the darkness of the tonality. the usage of the devil's chord and all that kind of stuff. Like I really liked that sound. It just appealed to me, that more somber, shying away from major key kind of stuff. So that was always intentional, kind of pulling from what I just thoroughly enjoyed listening to. That was a starting point for Aziola Cry, was to have that more darkness to it. Because it was instrumental, I really felt like, playing that up a little bit with the writing, but also then with the ideas, the concepts behind it. So the first album was about the idea of loss. It was entitled Ellipsis, and it was implying that there was something missing, kind of like an ellipsis does in a sentence. And so that was all about the idea of just losing something that was important to you. The second album was entitled Ghost Conversations, which was a kind of a follow-up to that, about having one more chance with that thing that was lost, whether it be a person or a thing. If you had one more chance to do it differently, what would it be like? And that was Ghost Conversations. And then the last album, The Ironic Divide, was about the idea of just thinking, like, why do people do bad things, really? And I just start thinking, like, what's the mindset, and what is it that creates that? And so that was exploring that. So I kind of like started creating these a little bit more darker conceptual ideas too, to go along with the music. And that's kind of where all that kind of came from. The artwork too kind of played into that a little bit, with a lot of the monochrome kind of look to it. So it was all very intentional, and it basically comes from my enjoyment of heavy music. So
Makes sense. It makes sense to me anyway. Here's something else I never ask people, and I wish I had. Uh, I'm going to call them outsiders for the sake of argument. Outsiders knock progressive rock a lot because there are no lyrics or there are extended instrumental passages. How do you counter someone who comes to you and says, "Why don't you have any words?"
it's been said. um, I think at the end of the day, there's two reasons for that. One, it comes from, again, it's a personal thing. Like, I love instrumental music. I think that comes from the fact that I listen to a lot of classical music and jazz music. Like, I enjoy that. I think there's nothing, I'm not taking anything away from vocal music at all, because I enjoy that as well. But when you have vocal music, everything revolves around the vocals, and what you're saying and the message you're getting across is all coming out by way of the vocals. And I always liked the challenge of trying to create a story that felt more like a soundtrack to something than the vocals carrying that storyline. So when I create these stories, there's a lot more to it. At least in my mind, there's a lot more to it. So parts that get heavy, that's intentional. Parts that get quieter, it's because that's the part in the story that would have happened. So it's all, in my mind, a very intentional movement, like a soundtrack would. And it just, I guess it comes from that, again, interest in where I'm at. It's like, I love going to see movies and watching, but listening to the soundtrack. I walk
Oh yeah,
away from movies and go buy the soundtrack, because to me, yeah, sure, the not lyrics, but the words that they spoke, the dialogue was important to the story, but the part that I want to remember is the great songs that were coming behind it, or
yeah.
the classical piece kind of a thing. So I've always just loved that. So maybe it's a little bit more just simply for me than for the people that ask me, why I don't. But um, I don't know. And I think I just tend to, like I said, listen to that stuff more often than not. So it's just a part of what I enjoy the most, is that instrumental. And in fairness, too, one other thought is, when you play an instrument like that, I kind of want to be heard. I kind of want to, explore the instrument a little bit
Sure,
more than
sure.
just being the background of something. So this is, again, not to say that I wouldn't do that, but the point of this band was really to kind of showcase three players. And so,
And again,
well,
it's working nicely. We're part of the same club. You and I guarantee you and I, when we see the opening credits for the movie, we can't wait to see who
Yeah.
wrote the soundtrack.
Right. That's exactly.
Oh, it's a Hans Zimmer. Okay, cool. It's a Jerry Goldsmith. All right, and they
Yep.
have each has a sound. You kind of know it when you see it. So I'm going to ask you, what are some of your favorite soundtracks for movies?
Um, you know, I love American Beauty.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think that's great. Blanking right now on the name. I could look it up real quick, but he's done a million things. He's done everything from Finding Nemo. What is his name? Thomas Newman.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know
I
that name.
love that soundtrack. Some of the Hans Zimmer stuff is really good. I mean, you can't deny that that stuff isn't great. The soundtrack that stands out though for me is like the greatest soundtrack, and again, I think it's because I come from a little bit of that darker place, but the soundtrack to Requiem for a Dream is amazing. Not only does it have Kronos Quartet playing, but the stuff that was written for that, it was written to sound like a requiem, as that movie, if you've ever seen it, is takes the lives of the characters go in a complete downward spiral.
Okay,
And so it's fascinating what he did with the music. That was Clint Mansell that did that soundtrack. I love it.
okay. Excellent, excellent. Now I have another soundtrack to listen to. So you got to be poetry and soundtracks. So see,
Yeah, there you go.
this is why I love these interviews because I get to learn stuff all the time. Um, if you haven't heard Hans Zimmer, you probably have Hans Zimmer's soundtrack for The Dark Knight.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Oh, that's
just
fantastic.
just the opening track. Why so serious? And I used to
Right.
joke with my friends. I have this overwhelming urge to rob a bank now
Yeah.
because that soundtrack is so good. You ever consider doing some of that on your own, writing some soundtracks?
I would love to. In fact, I've been speaking with people about that. It sounds like from the people that I know that are in the business, they're kind of saying like, "Oh, run." But I don't, I'm not convinced that they're right because I can't. I'd love to do that. In fact, something I don't want to just talk too much about it, but something I have coming up, which would be probably next year, is very much in that vein. A little bit more classical sort of sounding. Still has a progressive rock edge to it, but definitely has a little bit of that to it. And the intent is for that. It's like I'm hoping to send it out to people and see if that's an option to get something like that. Everybody that listens to, especially because I do instrumental music, a lot of the times they say, "Oh, so this would be good in a film." So I do have intentions and would love for it to be in a film.
Nice, nice. And you say it has a little more of a classical bent to it, and with a prog element. Progressive rock seems to find a lot of roots in classical music, and so it
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me when you say you listen to classical and you listen to jazz because the mindset is very similar. Does any of that leak through in your writing? Who are some of your favorites? Do you feel yourself being influenced by them?
Yeah. I don't know if it comes out in my writing. I could tell you my favorites, but I think I pull more from their mentality or some of the ideas that they do on different levels. But the person that I always go to the most is like my idol is Jonas Hellborg. Uh,
Oh yeah,
so I always loved everything he's done, but I don't know if I wouldn't say it at all. I sound like Jonas Hellborg, but what I've pulled from him is I love the fact that every album that he does sounds drastically different from the next. So that has been something that I just have always liked. Like I don't want to repeat even with Aziola Cry. If you listen to the three albums we've done so far, and even with the next one's gonna be like they don't sound alike. There's very drastic differences between them.
right.
And I like that. With my solo work, every album that I do is drastically different from the next one as well. And that's something I've definitely pulled from him is, at the end of the day, I hope it all sounds like me, but within that, nothing is the same. And that could either be through the instrumentation. Like I said, the next thing I've got coming out after some point next year is there's some classical instruments on the album. So like that's a very drastic twist from the guitar, drums, Warr Guitar, uh,
Nice.
or the thing I, do with a drummer in the Warr Guitar. So it's very different, and I like that. So that's somebody that I definitely have pulled from, I would say, the most in terms of like who I idolize.
Nice. And the other thing about instrumental music and a jazz background is there's room to switch things up a little bit. There's room to improvise. You're not stuck with a lyrical passage that you have to, verse, bridge, chorus, all that kind of stuff. How much do you find yourself wanting to change things on the fly, if at all?
So it's different with the different things I do. So with Aziola Cry, it's very structured. Uh, that is the way it's written is the way it goes. I do a lot of solo shows, and one of the things that I do in those solo shows is never play it the same twice. I think of it as more like they're not exactly like this, but more like jazz heads where the improvised sections are completely improvised. And so I don't hold myself to the same kind of restraints as the Aziola Cry prog kind of band does. So it depends on what it is that I'm doing, I guess. But having said that, the Aziola Cry, the part that is completely improvised is I guess this is just a me thing. Mike is a lot more like the way he played it on the album is the way you're going to hear his solos.
Mm-hmm.
Two things. One, I play so many solos that I could go back and relearn them, but it's like they're fleeting moments that I would have to go back and try to figure out because they're not pre-written.
Right.
And the other part of it is I do like there to be an element of surprise. So my solos every night are never planned. Those are always improvised, but then the music itself is all very structured for that band. But yeah, I'm much more of the like play and see what happens kind of thing, which I get a chance to do that when I'm doing my solo work, not necessarily within that band context.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Sometimes I guess a little structure is better for you. Your music is, I don't know if I want to say complex, but it definitely requires a high degree of attention. Or
Yeah.
you're gonna, or you're gonna.
Yeah, no. With that band, I think if I think there's just if you listen carefully, there's just so many odd time signature changes, and there's so many little subtleties that like if you were to start to make stuff up on the fly, I think it would kind of take away from what that band is trying to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
So
How much is too much when you write a progressive rock piece for you? What's your standard where you think to yourself, okay, we've gone too far. Let's let's back off a little bit. Does that ever happen for you?
um well, I think what I've learned is more in hindsight what's too much. So for example, Saturday we played a song that the title track, The Ironic Divide. It's 22 minutes long. I don't think I'd ever do that again. It was fun to do once. It's mentally draining. By the time you're done with that, you just want to go take a nap. And I've learned that like that is not something I want to continue to do. The
Right.
new album is a lot more condensed, I would say, shorter songs. And when I say short, they still reach close to 9 minutes. But that 22-minute long thing's like I think I'm kind of done with that. So when is too much too much? I would say like I'm getting to the point where it's like 10 minutes plus is probably a little too much because yeah, some of those songs like they're they feel too draining to do too many of them. So
Yeah. My favorite progressive rock song of all time is probably "Supper's Ready" from
yeah,
Genesis. And I've been listening to that song for 40 years, and there are still times when I don't think I remember little passages here and there, and
yeah,
that's got to be exhausting. I mean, we're going to play a 2 hour set, but this tune is
right.
going to take up, it's going to take up,
Yeah,
going to take up half an hour's worth, and it's just, and the fans have heard that song over and over again, and if you miss a note, somebody's
yeah.
going to.
They expect it to be played right.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, he didn't
Yeah,
play that completely correctly. He skipped something in the 9/8 section or something along those lines.
right.
It's craziness. I was glad to see you at Progstock. Are you would you call yourself a festival type of band, or are you just looking to get out there on your own?
We plan to get out there on our own with this new album. I mean, I love doing the festivals. And so, I mean, any opportunity to do those I take them in a second, because I just love the atmosphere of those festivals. Last year we did Prog Day. This year was Progstock. And I think those festivals just have such a cool atmosphere of like camaraderie. From last year to this year, seeing a lot of similar or familiar faces was really cool. You know, there's just something about that whole atmosphere that I love. So I mean, I would continue to do those, but the plan is to now get out and do a little bit more of our own, especially out east. I think we want to hit that. So yeah, I would say it's a little mixture of both. Like we do like playing our own things, but these festivals are so much fun. You gotta do them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's nice to be surrounded by people who speak the same language
Yeah,
because it's
that's
not
exactly it.
it's not always the case. I think of when I talked to Adrian Ballou and King Crimson was opening for Tool,
Yeah.
and Adrian got out amongst the crowd after the gig was over, and he heard a couple of young people talking, and one of them said, "Man, that King Crimson, man, they play some tricky shit." So he's like, "That's it. We're the band known for playing tricky shit now." Which leads me to the question, because it's just not just me telling stories. Is there anybody you could see yourself, joining for a tour that would just be kind of ideal for those circumstances?
Whew. I mean, honestly, I'd love to play with anybody. We did a show with Aziola Cry last year with the Aristocrats, and
Good combination.
that was a good combination. I loved that. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I think, it doesn't even always have to be instrumental. I think a lot of times, and that's the one thing that booking people don't always get right, is I think sometimes different is better. I think a lot of times they want to put us with another instrumental band, or they want to feel that it has to have some similarity of, like, a heavy band. But I honestly feel like with us, we can fit just as well with a heavy band, a heavy metal band with singing, as much as we could fit with a fusion band with that is a little bit more instrumental or whatever. So I kind of feel like, maybe it's the nature of being instrumental itself, but I think we could go with anybody and have a good time with it. So I don't think that that I would like to limit myself to just anybody in terms of like who I'd love to, like, dream kind of stuff. I mean, I guess I tend to lean more towards the progressive stuff when it comes to that. Like, that Tool King Crimson show was, like, for me, a dream show.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's two of my favorites right there. So stuff like that is awesome. But yeah, in terms of us playing, I mean, anything would be great.
Nice. Nice. We've hinted at some stuff you're working on. I'm going to give you the opportunity to go into detail now. Tell me what's going on, what's on your plate, because I know it's one more thing, more than one thing. What all do you have going on?
Yeah, so I've hit this, like, complete creative burst. I've just been so into the writing, like playing the instrument and writing music on the instrument. So I've got a bunch of different things going on. So I'll start quiet and I'll move up to loud. I'm signed to an ambient record label named Wayfarer Records out in Seattle. And so with them, I do uh, more ambient style music. I've put out one, two, three, four albums, five albums with them. I have something coming out next year with them. It's a little bit of a departure from what I did prior with them, but still kind of in that quiet ambient vein, but a little bit more, I say, featuring the Warr Guitar as a solo instrument. So I'm, like, soloing over the ambient pieces more than just truly making ambient background. So I've got that thing going on. I've got a new album coming out in a couple weeks entitled Radiant Dusk. This is just solo Warr Guitar. I have a semi-acoustic Warr Guitar, so it's like a semi-hollow. And that one is what I do a lot of the solo shows with. So quieter shows. I've got a I've got about 6 of those shows coming up in the next few weeks. One of which will be kind of like the record release party or so here in Chicago. And that music is just purely me. That's what I was referring to, is kind of having a head to the song and just soloing away and kind of doing whatever the song, wherever it takes me. And I really enjoy doing those shows. Those are fun because they're a lot more intimate, and they really kind of push my playing a lot because it's just me up there with the Warr Guitar.
Right.
And so I have that album, Radiant Dust, that's coming out. I just earlier this year signed with Trey Gunn's label 7D Media, and that's that album I referred to, Subsequent Ruins, with Marco Miniman on drums. So I've got the louder version of me, which it's somewhat, at one point I kind of tossed this idea around. It's like, does this completely conflict with what Aziola Cry is doing? And I justify it in the sense that it's different because without the guitar, it forces me to do a lot more with the instrument. So it's just drums and me. And as I would say, the music also sounds very different as a result of that. I think of it as a little bit maybe pulling from 80s Crimson, where there's a lot of, the left hand and right hand, in my case, are interlocking with each other and doing some interesting rhythmic patterns, I would say. And then Marco doing his thing over the top of it, which is pretty awesome. And then, and I'm recording another one of those. In fact, that's what I'm currently in the studio recording. And then I have Aziola Cry, which is in the studio as well. My parts are done, so that's why I've switched focus to my next loud prog album. But the band is currently in the studio, so I've been overseeing a lot of that and heading in there. The plan for that is to have a new Aziola Cry album, probably early spring, I would say, for next year. So it's kind of like I've got those 4 parts of me that always have something in the works or something out.
It's kind of it's a good version of schizophrenia. Is what it boils down to. He's multifaceted, kids. That's what it boils down to. I was thinking about the theater that you were playing in on Saturday. What's the ideal size room for you? What's the room that you feel like you're most comfortable playing in with Aziola Cry?
With Aziola Cry, I would say, where I loved playing this past year, it was that show with the Aristocrats. Was you would know it just because we actually hung out there. Is
Right.
the Reggie's Rock Room? I love a room like that for the a show like Aziola Cry. Not the Rock Room. What's the bigger club called?
It's on at the Rock Club. I think
Yeah, the
that's what
Rock
they
Club.
call it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was a great size room for the band. I actually really loved that stage on Saturday, to be honest with you. I mean, that was pretty cool. I definitely love that. It was hard for me to see out into the audience. There was a light that kind of hit me wrong, where
Okay.
I couldn't see a thing out there, but it seemed pretty cool. I was there obviously looking at it from the other side of but yeah, I definitely like that. That's a cool room. I would love to do something like that again. But yeah, I would say, like, size wise, I like that kind of mid. I like it where you can still see the people. You could still kind of feel them liking the music, a little too far away, and where they become uh, just standing or sitting there. Like I like a little bit more movement, and the band is capable of producing that. So it's kind of nice to see people kind of rocking to it.
Yeah.
It's just sitting there politely. So
Well, for what it's worth, as somebody who was, I guess, technically an audience when I wasn't running around taking pictures and what have you, you were well received, and I was thinking the same thing. This is about the size you need to be in because it starts with me detesting hockey arena and stadium gigs for starters, but there's certain music that just needs that closeness. You need to be able to connect with the band. And when you're playing, and I'm gonna let you off the hook sooner or later, but when you're playing, how essential is it that you connect with the people in the audience?
That's my favorite part. I absolutely love that. And that's why, especially not all gigs allow this. Sometimes, they make you, lug your gear off or get, whatever it is. But personally, for me, the ideal situation is playing, putting my instrument down, and immediately walking out into the audience and connecting with people on a more personal level.
Yeah.
People love to talk about the instrument. So one of the things that happened actually on that Saturday is we went left for a little bit and then came back and spent most of that day at the venue. And it was so great just connecting with everybody who had just seen us and asking, tons of questions about the instrument. Because one of the things that I love to do, and maybe this is normal, maybe it's not, but I can talk about the Warr Guitar for hours and hours. You, if you get me
It's almost
started,
necessary.
yeah, probably. But like, if you get me started, you probably at some point like, oh gosh, I should never have asked this guy. This won't stop now. But I just love talking about it. So like, and it's not coming from a standpoint of like, I'm not trying to show off. It's like, I'm literally just trying to say like, this is a really cool instrument. And I'd like to talk about it and what it does and how it's played and the tuning and all the different aspects of it. So I like that part, going out into the audience and talking about it and having people ask me questions about, especially guitarists, like, well, explain the tuning to me and turning people on to, I've always thought about playing it. Where can I get one? I love answering those questions and getting people turned on to it. So for me, that's the most important part is that. So there's a connection from the stage that exists to a certain degree, but it's really, for me, it's that afterwards thing. Like I'll never not like going out immediately and engaging with people. That's the
Well, we
fun.
always appreciate that because even for me, and I'm going to ask you to participate in something else down the road. I'll tell you about it later. When I look at Trey play something like where his half of his Warr Guitar is fretless, I
Yeah.
mean, just to have that variation in sound, it's it's interesting because, like I said, I don't have the attention span to play a quote unquote traditional instrument, so it's got to be a nice twist for you to be able to switch up sounds here and there.
Yeah. No, I think that's one of the coolest things about the instrument itself is just there's so much still to be done, I feel like. I mean, I think there's it's a relatively new instrument, so I think there's just so much more to be discovered on it. But there's just so many, like, the possibilities are endless, I feel like. And that's one of the cool things is if you look at how all the players play it, nobody really plays it the same. And I think that's testimony to the instrument and
Right.
the coolness of it. So
Makes sense. I when you say it's still relatively young, for me, it's almost like the instrument's in its toddlerhood.
yeah.
You've got to, when I saw Trey play one, okay, now this instrument is born. And have you considered what he's doing and playing with one just lying down, almost like a lap steel, or has that not reached you yet?
Yeah, no, that hasn't reached. But the part that's similar is that the reason he's done that is because of the weight and lugging it around and that kind of a thing. How I've handled it, at least up to this point, is like I mentioned earlier, is carving out a lot of the inside of it so as to take the weight down. But for me, I just he's acknowledges too. There's something less rock and roll about sitting down. For me, I'm still in that phase where it's like I got to stand up, I got to move around, and so yeah, I
Well,
haven't.
you're a young fella. That's what that is. You're a youngster. That's it, and enjoy it while you can. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But I mean, just the stuff he produced. I keep going back to Deception of the Thrush in that Live in Japan video, and
Yeah,
he very nearly made me cry. Playing
yeah,
when he was
that's
playing with the instrument laying down. It was just amazing. So that's your homework. I want to. I want something like that from you. I'll let you off on
that's
the
good.
hook on this. I'm going to get out of the way and allow you to plug yourself. We talked about the records you've done, and people should hear them. So where are we going to find them?
So I always like to point people in the direction of my website, jasonblakemusic.com. I I know social media is super important now, and I know a lot of people just use social media as their website, but I still really like my website. I like updating that first, and then the social media kind of comes afterwards. So I think of that as really the home base still. So jasonblakemusic.com. From there, there's of course links to the social media. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and all those things. But I still like the main page the best first and foremost. Music in terms of that, Bandcamp is a great place. I also have a store on my site, so you can buy the physical CDs straight from there. That's kind of nice for me personally, is I make the most money from that. So, Bandcamp is really nice. But if I can get people to actually buy directly from my site, that's even better. So it's kind of nice. And then where else? Aziola Cry has a site, aziolacry.com. Just because it's an unusual name, AZIOLACRY.com.
Thank you. Read my mind.
And there's all the social media for Aziola Cry as well, the same kind of thing. And Bandcamp pages as well. The only thing that you can't necessarily find but you could find on and that's another reason why I like the website, is because, so say for example, my album on 7D Media, that's not on my Bandcamp, and 7D has the exclusive right to sell it. So that's where you would find that. But if you go to my page, there's links off of that to get to all the places that you can purchase these things. So
Excellent. And as someone who is still hopelessly addicted to physical media, you're a man after my own heart.
yeah, no, I
I'm looking
love it.
forward to checking out that stuff. It's just we're not going down that path right now. That's a whole different conversation. And I've been in more arguments on social media than I care to discuss right now. Jason, I can't thank you enough for hanging out with me. This
Thank
has
you.
been fun. Be sure to put your concert schedule on those
Yes.
websites.
Oh, yeah. That's another reason to go to my website, is they're all on there, and I always update those first. Social media, I'm a little late because I want to put them out to kind of, I use social media more to promote. My website is a place to just have everything always at all times. So yeah, there's a lot of I think there's 8 or 9 dates already up there with more coming. So
Excellent, and I'm going to be there because you've got a new diehard fan now. As soon as you walked off, I'm
very cool.
following this group because this stuff is good. Thanks a lot, Jason. We wish you
Thank
luck
you.
in the future, and we will see you down the road.
Great. Thank you so much.